Hello everyone, my name is Kiril Georgiev and I'm a business analyst at PLANA Solutions. Today I'm going to showcase to you an integration between Odoo and Payhawk that our team has developed. Just to specify, currently we are running Odoo 15, but we have versions for the integration for Odoo 14 to Odoo 17. Right now, we're going to specify the parameters that we need to pass from Odoo to Payhawk in order for the system to categorize our expenses correctly. To begin with, we need to navigate to the invoicing module in Odoo. Here in the configuration menu, you can see we have a Payhawk category. We've got Payhawk settings and a sync log. The sync log showcases the technical data that's been passed between the two systems. And in the Payhawk settings is where we actually define all of the relevant information that we want to be passed from Odoo to Payhawk. Here, first of all, we've got the API key. This API key is the main thing that connects the two systems. It is generated through Payhawk, and if we go to our Payhawk system, navigate to Settings, you will find an Integrations menu where you can manage your API keys. If I hit on Manage, I simply have to copy this API key and paste it into my API field here. This will connect the two systems once the settings are saved, and the account will be detected and all of the funds will be generated correctly. Next up is the invoices and receipts journals. In Payhawk, you've got a possibility to categorize your documents in invoices and receipts. Here we've got an option to send those different types of documents into different accounting journals, hence the invoices journal and the receipts journal field. Next up, we've got the fund accounts. Fund accounts are basically bank accounts in Odoo language, and they are generated through our Payhawk funds. As you can see, in every fund account in Payhawk that we have some money in is generated as a bank account in Odoo. Down below, you can find the different tabs that we will define information in. First and foremost, we've got a sync log. Once again, this is the technical data that's been passed between the systems. Here, you also have an option to manually synchronize the data with Payhawk upon pushing this button here. It's important to note that the synchronization is automatic on a timed basis, usually around 5 to 10 minutes. But you always have the option to manually synchronize it when needed. Next up, and probably most important, is the expense products. Here in the expense products tab, you can see there is a list of products. These are normal Odoo products. They have got a SKU number, a Payhawk category name or a normal name. They've got an internal category and an expense account. From the Odoo standpoint, these are, as we said, normal products, which are in the expense category since we're going to be measuring expenses. And this field here is going to correspond to the main categorization in Payhawk, which is the category of an expense. So this list here can be changed. You can add specific items. You can also remove specific items from the X down here. And once you are done with the changes of the list, we have to manually synchronize this field here with Payhawk. It's important to note that the expense products, or from the Payhawk standpoint, the categories, are the only field that needs to be manually synchronized. The way this happens is once we're done finishing up this list here, we hit on Export Expense Categories. As you can see, this downloads a small Excel file, which we then need to import into Payhawk. So go on to the Payhawk system, navigate to Settings, and Expense Fields. You will find the category expense field. Usually it's the topmost category. And here we need to click on the three dots and import. Then we simply have to upload the document that was just downloaded from Odoo. We'll say overwrite existing values, import, and we're done with the synchronization of the expense fields. Next up in our Odoo Payhawk settings are the tax rates. Once again, this is a list of the tax rates that we want to be synchronized from Odoo to Payhawk. Next up, we've got the miscellaneous tab. This is where we define all of the fields that we want to be synchronized between the systems. As you can see, there is a check mark for every possible field that is synchronizable between the system. So we've got a tax rates, we've got our chart of accounts, departments, suppliers, analytic accounts, and analytic tags, as well as the importation of bank statements. It's important to note that the suppliers are actually the only information that is two-way synchronized, which means that if we create a vendor here in Odoo, it is automatically going to be created in Payhawk as well, and vice versa. If we create a supplier in Payhawk, it's automatically going to be created in Odoo with the same information, of course. And this covers everything regarding the data that Payhawks wants from our Odoo system. And we're going to be covering the expenses from the Payhawk standpoint, how to create one and how that would be translated to our Odoo system. Here, it's important to note that for the demonstration, we're going to be using company cash expenses, even though most likely you would be using the Payhawk credit cards for your employees, but the process for each and every expense is basically the same. So for the demo, we're going to be using company cash. Let's head on to the expenses tab and click on new. As you can see, we have to select the payment method, as we said, company cash for this case, and we simply upload the document of the invoice that we're going to be paying off. Once that's done, we hit on add one expense. As you can see, the system tries to automatically fill in some of the information from the invoice that we've attached. But it's always a good idea to double check that information. So let's go through everything that we need to fill in. First and foremost, we've got the reason for the payment, which is under Note. In this case, I'm just going to select one of the items from the invoice and leave that as the reason for the expense. Next up is the supplier. The supplier, the system automatically tries to fill in, but in some cases on the invoice, the name of the supplier could be different from the name of our supplier in the system. Next up is the supplier. As you can see, the system automatically fills in the supplier from our invoice. However, in certain cases, the name on our supplier could be different from the one in the invoice, which could kind of lead the system away, and it could try to add a duplicate of that account. Now, Payhawk always tries to match the supplier to an already existing one. So it's always a good idea to double check your supplier and check if it is under existing suppliers. We move on to the categorization of the expense. Here, the most important field would be the category. This, if you recall, is the expense product from our Odoo Payhawk settings. As you can see, we have an advertising and marketing. Let's select that for now. And down below, we've got further categorization as departments, analytic tags, analytic accounts, projects, location, and the cost center. Let's put some analytic tags, which are automatically synchronized from our Odoo system, as well as the analytic account. Down below, we've got the document information. Here we've got the document date, the service period, document type, and the number of the invoice. The document type, if you can recall, is the main categorization for different document types in Payhawk. They are either an invoice or a receipt, which we have an option to collect in different accounting journals. Next up is the number of the invoice. In this case, I'm just going to change it up slightly, but it's always a good idea to double check if it matches the one on the invoice. Next up is the amount. We've got the paid currency here. In this case, it correctly assumed that it's euro. We've got the tax rate, which we'll leave as 0, and then the total. As you can probably see, the total here is different from the one in the invoice itself. So we have to manually change that. This showcases that it's always a good idea to double check the information that the system automatically fills in so that it matches the one in the invoice. Once we're done with all that, we can hit on submit. Now, in Payhawk, there are different workflows, and usually it would be the employees who make the expenses. They have to submit their expenses, such as that we just showed. And next, it would be up to their supervisors or financial supervisors to review their expenses. So let's say I've already submitted my expense, and my boss comes in to review the expense that I've created. Once they've double checked all the information and think that everything is all right according to plan, they hit on review. This is actually the trigger that sends our expense to our Odoo system. So before every expense is reviewed, it doesn't appear in our Odoo system. So my boss checks that everything is all right, hit on review, and our expense has been sent to Odoo. We just created an expense, submitted it, and it was reviewed from one of our superiors. So let's check how this has been translated to Odoo. If we go to our Odoo system and go to vendor bills, you can probably see that the reference of the invoice that we just created has already appeared. If we click here, you can see the invoice has been generated in Odoo with all of the relevant information that we put into the Payhawk system. As you can see, the vendor, it's Hetzner Online, exactly as it was here in Payhawk. Next up, in the invoice lines, we've got our main categorization. We've got the product, advertising and marketing. We've got the label, which would be the reason for the payment, so our free note. Then we've got the analytic account and analytic tags. The price and the taxes as well. Of course, generated in the appropriate journal in the appropriate currency. As you can probably see in our invoice, you have a quick access to open the expense or the invoice in Payhawk. This button right here, which is attached to every invoice generated through Payhawk, we've got a quick access to the expense in the Payhawk system. Also, the invoice that was attached here in the expense in Payhawk, you can also find as an attached file to the invoice in Odoo. This basically covers everything that we have to go through. You saw what information needs to be passed from Odoo to Payhawk. We saw how to create an expense in Payhawk, and we finally visualized how that expense would be generated in Odoo. Thank you all for watching, and I hope it's been interesting.